into the One Georgia Town Hall. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the One Georgia Town Hall series with Democratic nominee Jon Ossoff, who's challenging GOP Senator David Perdue. I'm Stephen Parker. I'm the campaign's political director. For those of you who are tuning in from Columbus, welcome. We're looking forward to your questions tonight. The original host of the show is going to be City Councilor Valerie Thompson. However, due to technical difficulties, I'm moderating tonight, and we're going to bring her back another time. Tonight's focus is going to be on Columbus-based questions, and then COVID-19 and how it is disproportionately affecting the Black community here in Georgia. Jon, I think we're going to jump right in and get going.
Cool. Well, welcome, everyone. I hope you all are tuning in on Facebook and Twitter and IG and all of our platforms. And Steve, just before we get going, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Some days it's a little more difficult than others, Jon, but adjusting pretty decently in this new reality. So I just made some chicken in my air fryer and knocked that out, and I'm ready to go.
I've got some ginger tea.
Oh, good. Yeah, I know. I've got a little water I'm sipping on while we do this. Yeah.
Let's hit it. Let's hear from the people.
First question. All right, good. Dr. Hugo from Columbus is wondering, how can we implement innovative methods to address health disparities?
Hey, Dr. Hugo, thank you so much for joining us. And hello, especially to everyone in Columbus who's joining us this evening. One of the things that I think we don't talk about enough is the infrastructure of healthcare access. What do I mean by that? We talk a lot about health insurance and underinsurance, and that is an essential part of this crisis. Right here in Georgia, even before COVID-19 struck, we had 1.5 million Georgians who lacked health insurance. It's much higher now because of all the job losses, and many more than that who were underinsured, meaning that their insurance wasn't meaningful enough in terms of what it would cover. And the state's refusal to expand Medicaid has made health insurance out of reach for a lot of folks who desperately need it. The other effect of the refusal to expand Medicaid is that it's starved a lot of clinics and hospitals, especially in rural and underserved areas, of resources. So in the Senate, I'm going to be fighting to solve the under and uninsurance problem, right? That's Medicaid expansion, that's public option. But we also have to solve the access problem. And that means we need both healthcare infrastructure and facilities and healthcare workers. So we need federal investment in clinics and hospitals in Georgia, especially in places where, many of our fellow Georgians could be 45 minutes to an hour from a primary care physician. They could be several hours from a level 1 trauma center. It doesn't have to be that way. We can build new healthcare infrastructure. And then we also need to expand the medical workforce. And so we should expand the US public health service to hire more doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals so that we make sure that, no one is so far from a physician that they can't get care when they need it.
That's the thing that was shocking to me, Jon. I've been here 3 years, and just the idea about folks in the rural area not having access. So I'm really happy that's part of our campaign's platform. Tania, it may be Tania, but Tania from Atlanta wants to know, how do you feel about the second stimulus? And what will families do after their federal unemployment insurance ends?
Yeah, so first of all, let's just talk briefly about the process here. Mitch McConnell runs the Senate, and what he's doing is playing the same old games that politicians in Washington have played for so long, which is to wait until the very last minute when essential help for so many Americans is about to expire, and then to use that as political leverage to try to secure concessions. We shouldn't be treating vital unemployment insurance at a time of mass unemployment as a political football, holding people's basic financial security who are out of work hostage to improve a political negotiating position. We have known for months, for example, that schools would need help reopening, that these unemployment insurance benefits would be expiring, that the recession that's resulted from this pandemic is going to last far beyond July. But instead of planning ahead instead of beginning the process of understanding, okay, what are we going to need to do in the best interest of the American people when the first stimulus package begins to expire. They waited to the last minute to launch negotiations so they could hold Americans hostage as a bargaining chip while they try to get their special favors for their donors and lobbyists in the legislation. So that process is just wrong, and it's got to change, and it's unethical. As for what this next stimulus should include, first of all, I released a proposal today that Congress must extend by another 120 days the moratorium on evictions for people who are facing eviction right now during this crisis. No American citizen should go homeless because of a pandemic.
Right.
No family should suddenly find themselves getting kicked out of their apartment because this public health crisis, which has been totally mishandled at the federal level, has put them into financial distress. And if Congress refuses to extend that moratorium on evictions, what message are they sending to the people? They're saying, okay, well, we've made a complete mess of this in Washington. We denied that this was a real problem for months. We've, with great speed, funneled hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars to corporate America and to major banks. But if you find yourself in financial distress because of this crisis, then you and your family just might wind up out on the street. That's the message Congress will send if they do not extend the moratorium on evictions. Second of all, Congress needs to send more direct help to people. And this is something, let's be very, very clear, because he and his team have been trying to mislead people on this. Senator Perdue stated unequivocally that he opposed $1,200 stimulus checks for working Americans.
I remember that. Yeah.
He was on the record. We have the receipts.
Yeah.
Now, he had no problem whatsoever with those hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars for corporate America, which is not surprising considering how he raises money for his campaigns. But first of all, as a matter of justice and as a matter of ethics, getting immediate help directly out to people who need it is the most important thing Congress can do. They should send another round of checks. They should do it without delay. They shouldn't gum it up in all kinds of complex schemes and conditions. They should send people money because people right now are suffering badly. That's also the most efficient way to stimulate the economy, rather than these big complex policy arrangements.
Right.
When we put resources into the pockets and bank accounts of families who right now are getting hit so hard, they're going to spend that money to sustain themselves. That means that's business and revenues for our small businesses.
That's right.
That's those Main Street businesses that have gotten relatively meager support compared to what the biggest corporations have gotten. So let's extend the moratorium on evictions. Let's make sure that we don't let these unemployment insurance benefits expire, and let's get more money directly to people who need it.
Yes, very good, very good. John, you remember Tanja Thomas down in Columbus? We did an in-person town hall then, and she's watching now. And I think she may end up with a question in the queue, but I wanted to say, hey, Tanja, nice to see you watching us tonight.
Hey, Tanja, and thanks everyone for tuning in, especially from Columbus. And I know that we'll get the council member who was going to be moderating worked in for a future event. So, Reverend, if you're watching, much love and respect, and we'll make it happen next time.
Yes, we will. John, let's take a Facebook Live question.
Right.
Let's see. Let's do Elizabeth. She wants to know, what are your thoughts on teachers going back to school? And she's from Decatur.
Yeah. Hey, Elizabeth. I hope you're well. I hope your family is well. Look, my view is that we should follow CDC guidelines. That's my top line view on so much of this, is that public health expertise should be followed in a public health emergency. And I don't know what we have to do to get that into these politicians' heads, that there are people who are trained and qualified and expert in exactly how to handle a situation like this. And rather than politicians trusting their gut or doing what their favorite lobbyists ask them to do, politicians, in the interests of saving lives and reducing the economic pain for so many families, should be implementing the suggestions of public health experts. That means that for schools to reopen, and we all want schools to reopen, we all want kids to get back into school, but we want it to happen safely. Those schools should meet CDC guidelines. And the federal government, we're talking about this next stimulus package. The federal government should provide the resources to school districts so that they can, and also so that if they cannot, they can make the transition to virtual learning as swiftly as possible. Here's somewhere else where I differ with my opponent, Senator David Perdue. Senator Perdue believes that only school districts who reopen for physical learning, whether or not they meet CDC guidelines, should be eligible for supplementary support right now.
No.
I think that's absolutely wrong. We want to reopen schools as swiftly as it is safe to do so, but to dangle federal dollars is what the president's doing. He's threatening to cut funding for schools that don't reopen. The public health advice be damned. That's wrong.
That is.
Not all school districts are equipped or ready, and we got hotspots across the country where we might be putting students and teachers and families at risk if they reopen too swiftly. We want those schools to reopen safely. And Senator Perdue should go back to the drawing board and put forward a proposal that equips those school districts that can't yet reopen or have to defer physical reopening, the equipment and technology they need so that kids can still learn from home.
Good. John, here's that question from Tom's I referenced earlier. In your first 100 days, will you make sure to visit rural South Georgia and help get set up temporary healthcare clinics until hospitals are built?
Absolutely, I'll be there. And look, I think that we're going to have to be on an emergency footing. And when I talk about federal resources for clinics, and I talk about expanding the U.S. public health service, we're not going to be able to wait, a year for that legislation to move through the process. We're going to have to get that done swiftly so that we have the healthcare facilities and healthcare workers out in communities that still have those shortages of access, especially in the middle of a pandemic. And Tanza, thank you again for the question. And by the way, I just want to say, I want to give props to my team for setting up this system. So many people in so many fields are having to adapt to these circumstances. We always put public health first, but we were scratching our heads thinking about what the best way we can to make sure that people have direct access to me and to the campaign would be. And I think it's awesome that Team Ossoff has put together this system so we can still hold a public town hall like this. We can take questions live, and everyone just remember, if you have a question, just pop it in down here, and we look forward to it. What's next, Steve?
All right, so we have Nakia from Peachtree Corners is wondering, if elected to the Senate, how do you plan to dismantle systemic racism?
Complicated question.
Yeah,
Complicated question. Let's focus on tangible things that we need to achieve. We need to pass a new Civil Rights Act in Congress, which will empower the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division to hold local departments, local prosecutors, local governments accountable where there is brutality against citizens, where there is systematic racial bias, where there's the violation of civil and constitutional rights. That's a step that we can take right away. We also need to pass what should, I believe, be called the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to fully restore and strengthen the Voting Rights Act so that state and local officials can't get up to their usual hijinks and shenanigans to disenfranchise people, so that these huge voter purges are subject to proper scrutiny and can be prevented where they are disenfranchising people, so that the changes to voting procedures that states and counties propose are subject to scrutiny. And so that state officials like Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger can be held accountable where their actions disenfranchise their own citizens. Those would be two major steps to tackling systemic racism in America. We need, at the federal level, a Civil Rights Act that holds local jurisdictions accountable. For example, the prosecutors who declined to pursue the case against the killers of Ahmaud Arbery.
Right.
They should be held accountable.
Right.
Voting officials who disenfranchise their own citizens, they should be held accountable.
Agreed. Agreed. Completely. Felicia from Kennesaw, John asks, with all of the chaos that Donald Trump has caused, how are you going to help turn everything around to help make America a respectful country again?
I think that's a brilliant question. How do we return to a culture and an atmosphere and a politics of mutual respect and decency and compassion and kindness? And look, those aren't platitudes. Those are real American values that are under attack right now. We have political leadership at the national level that tries to achieve its political ends by dividing us, by making Americans hate one another, by fomenting community against community resentments. It's wrong. It runs contrary to my values. It runs contrary to the values of the overwhelming majority of Americans. Most people are good people.
Yes.
Most people want the same things out of life. A lot of people who are disengaged from politics aren't necessarily disengaged because they're apathetic. They're disengaged because they look at this ridiculous circus of corruption and extremism and want no part of it.
Right.
So I will do my small part to offer leadership that unifies people. I will represent all Georgians. Whether we agree or disagree, I'll come to you live, just like this, account for my votes and positions, and answer for my conduct. Senator David Perdue hasn't held a single live in-person town hall in 6 years as your senator.
Yeah.
Even if you like his voting record, is that acceptable? Isn't the bare minimum requirement of effective and respectful public leadership that you're accountable in public, in person, in the flesh, to the people you represent? So I think that despite everything that's going on and despite how hateful politics has become, I actually feel more hopeful now than I have in a long time, because I believe that there is a huge wave, a majority of Georgians and Americans who are getting ready to vote because they recognize that the politics that we've got right now, Donald Trump's politics, not only is it rank incompetence and corruption that costs lives and costs livelihoods, it's also immoral and indecent.
I'm really excited to be living in the times we're in, John. I didn't know what the next civil rights movement or big movement would be, and now we find ourselves right in the middle of it. And speaking speaking of values and decency and character, Rosie from Lithonia wondered, since John Lewis was one of your mentors, will you take some of his teachings with you as you enter the U.S. Senate?
Thank you so much for the question. And let me just share with y'all, this is a Mike Lukovich cartoon, the celebrated Georgia cartoonist, called The Bridge.
I love that.
And this depicts John Lewis bridging the gap between the people and the voting booth. And of course, that symbolizes how he put his body on the line crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, where he had his skull fractured by a billy club, and in so many other cases when he was beaten and assaulted, like so many of his fellow civil rights activists, demanding and fighting for voting rights and civil rights. And I have been grieving the loss of this great man and someone who was really important to me and played a huge role in my life. And I wouldn't be doing any of this, Steve, if not for Congressman Lewis, and you know that.
I know it, yeah.
And in terms of the lessons that we have to carry forward, I mean, I think that's the most important part. If John Lewis were still with us today, he'd be urging us on. He would say, keep your eyes on the prize.
Yeah.
He would say, keep the faith. He would say, keep fighting for the beloved community. The beloved community. This is, these are words that he said so often in public and in private. a community, a world, a country where every individual is sacred and respected, where human dignity is sacred, where we recognize the folly of poverty and war. That's the world that John Lewis was fighting for universal human rights and universal human dignity. So I will carry the lessons that I learned from that man with me every day I serve this state in the Senate. And I'm grateful for the impact that he had on me, but more than that, I'm grateful for his impact on our history and what he was able to achieve on behalf of so many people.
That's right. He always seemed to have such clarity, John, and really distilled it all down to very simple principles. It's really not that complicated if you sort of hook your intention about how you live to a certain set of principles and live them out. He was an amazing example of that for me. And
yeah, I mean, isn't that the point too? Is that it's actually not that complicated?
It's not. Yeah.
That's kind of one of the disorienting things about this time is that, you know, when you have the sort of cynical political leadership that we have at the national level right now, it creates confusion and disorientation.
That's exactly right.
But none of this is that complicated.
Oh.
Every American should have great health care. Every American should have voting rights. Every American should be equal under the law and be entitled to protection of their constitutional and civil rights. Every American who works an honest day should make enough money to provide for their family and put some away for retirement. And it's not complicated how we get there.
Yeah.
We're just so distracted and divided by this ridiculousness that we see in Washington right now and the corruption in our political system that has politicians, and I'm not afraid to say it, politicians in both parties,
That's right.
more focused on serving donors and lobbyists and serving the people.
That's right. That's right. We've got an affordable housing question up next, John. John from Marietta says, John, I'm concerned about affordable housing. I'm on a fixed income soon, and I will not be able to afford to live in my home. Is there anything we can do?
Yeah, and look, before COVID-19 hit and this pandemic became the matter of most urgent concern everywhere, the affordability of healthcare and the affordability of housing were the two things that most concerned folks across this state, rural, suburban, urban. And that's why I think that the infrastructure bill that we're going to need to pass to rebuild this economy, when we have the Biden administration taking office, when we have a Democratic Senate, we're going to have to get to work right away on a major infrastructure bill. It's going to need to have a huge clean energy component so that we can invest in sustainability and reducing carbon emissions. It's going to need to have investments in research and development so that we can develop the technologies of the future at our great institutions of learning and research institutions like many of our colleges and universities here in Georgia, whether the HBCUs at Atlanta University Center or UGA, Georgia State, Emory. And it's also going to need to have an affordable housing component, because this is also sort of, this is economics 101. When there's a shortage of housing, then prices are out of control. And we need to invest in affordable mixed income housing, especially in these fast growing urban centers like Atlanta, because what's happening and what's been happening is that as there's really rapid economic development, for example, in the city of Atlanta, and property values start going through the roof, folks either can't pay their property taxes anymore, or they can't make the rent anymore, and then they are displaced far away from where they work.
That's it.
And then when we don't have adequate investment in transit, there's no way to get to work.
That's it. Yeah.
And so that infrastructure bill also needs to have investment in mass transit so that people can get around our state affordably.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. We've got another actual Facebook Live question coming in from Nia. She's a student at Georgia Tech. She had to fight with her fellow students to push for mask mandates, John, and ensure online options for students. She wants to know how we can challenge Governor Kemp about coronavirus mandates.
I was talking, hi Nia, and thank you for joining us. And hey to all the students and young people out there watching, and please throw your questions in the mix. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about following public health advice. The evidence is overwhelming. The public health advice is unanimous that requiring masks in public places, and especially in public buildings and grocery stores and bars and shops, is one of the most effective and efficient ways we have of reducing transmission and spread of this virus. That means saving human lives. That means preventing unnecessary death and suffering. By wearing a mask out in public, we reduce the chances that one of our neighbors or friends or family members or fellow Georgians has to go into the intensive care unit and be put on a ventilator and possibly die because of the effects of this virus. So we all have a personal ethical obligation to take this step, where public health experts have so advised us. But our elected officials also have an ethical obligation to heed this public health advice. I don't know what they need to see to shake themselves out of this stupor and denial they're in. Act like real leaders and implement public health advice. We have skyrocketing hospitalizations in Georgia. We've lost nearly 200 Georgians in the last 72 hours from this disease. And Brian Kemp, who should be ashamed of himself, is wasting time and money trying to strike down Mayor Bottom's requirement that people wear masks in public buildings and public places, because apparently it's offended his ego that she's taken that step, and because he wants to pander to the most extreme elements in his political base while people are dying. There are Republican and Democratic governors across the country that have passed common sense mask requirements in public places.
Yeah.
Not everything has to be this huge partisan culture war. We've got to return to common sense and take the advice of the scientists and the health experts when we're in the public health crisis. And so Nia, thank you for your leadership in your community, and everybody out there. Take this seriously, y'all.
Yeah.
Don't wait for the politicians to save us. They've had months. They've failed us. It's on us. Wear the mask. Practice good social distancing. Heed public health expertise. All right, what's next, Steve?
Yeah, John, if we were playing a game, I'd say you recently did an interview with DJ Scream on this topic. And you'd say,
man, we talked about, okay, DJ Scream, and we had a wide-ranging conversation. We talked about Atlanta hip hop. We talked about criminal justice reform. We talked about COVID-19 stimulus, and we talked about cannabis policy.
Okay, that's the one. That's what this next question is about, from Adrian from Alpharetta. He wants to know, what is your position on cannabis? And he's actually on Facebook Live watching right now. He sent the question a little bit earlier, but it's great that we can answer it while he's watching live.
Hey, Adrian, thanks for the question. Thanks for the question, Adrian. And my answer is legalize it. Simple. I think that the prohibition of this substance is irrational. I don't encourage its use, nor do I encourage alcohol abuse. Our health is our own responsibility. And the fact that there are people sitting in prison with heavy sentences for nonviolent cannabis-related offenses while other people are getting rich in the legal cannabis industry is a disgraceful injustice. We waste huge amounts of money and we destroy lives with the enforcement of this prohibition. And it's high time that we changed course.
Good. And John, we are running out of time now. And so this is going to be the last question for the evening. It's from Elizabeth, who wants to know, what is the best thing we can be doing in our communities to encourage people to vote and get involved with these crucial elections in the midst of COVID-19?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. And it's a great note to close on, because I need your help. My team needs your help getting the message out right now. And I know, it's not like what you often see when it's campaign time and we're out in neighborhoods knocking on doors in our campaign t-shirts. And I wish we could do that, but we can't. It's not the responsible thing for us to do right now in the interest of public health. But there are thousands and thousands of people who are working to support this campaign as volunteers every week, sending text messages, making phone calls. Right now, we have so much work to do to check folks' voter registration status, make sure that they're already thinking about making a plan to vote, make sure they're already thinking about how they're going to request absentee ballots so they can vote. I want everyone to just take a moment, if you're watching at home, open up the calendar application on your computer, pull out your phone, open up your calendar, mark Tuesday, November 3rd as election day. And then once this broadcast is over, go back in there and invite your whole phone book to election day. And then, and we'll pop it in the comments below. If you go to electjon.com, electjon.com, you can sign up to volunteer. We need your help. We'd welcome it. Much love and respect and appreciation to everyone. Steve, thank you for moderating. Great job. Thanks for the questions. We'll be doing another one of these soon. This was our One Georgia Town Hall for Thursday, the 23rd of July. Stay healthy and safe, everybody.
Good night, everyone.